And welcome back to the Dark Outpost, an excursion of the darkest outposts of the human mind and beyond. Penny L.A. Shepherd and David Zublik with you Wednesday, December 28th, 2022. And let's turn it over to our great executive producer and co-host Penny L.A. Shepherd for some news headlines, and then our next guest, T.A. Powell. Penny?
I'd actually like to introduce TA, and I sent you some of the introduction just in case Elsa starts howling again.
Alrighty.
So, 1 second.
Alrighty.
Okay, T.A. Powell is a successful playwright through Howard Publishing, LLC. She actually has her own publishing company as well, I believe, and is the artistic and managing director of a theater in North Georgia. An avid participant within the field of performing arts, T.A. Powell finds her job a natural extension of her artistic capability. Fascinated by the lure of unsolved cases, she prefers to write historical fiction pieces, finding it more palatable format when dealing with sensitive information. Time and distance from a crime allows her characters the opportunity to separate fact from collective truth and place them both equally under the microscope of objectivity. Her process is to take the DNA of a case, what facts are known and what has been conjured, apply the theory of Occam's razor to each, and then carefully weave a gripping tale of plausibility from the two. The goal of TA's writing is not necessarily to answer all the questions surrounding these unsolved cases, but to be certain they are finally heard, and works closely with researchers from CCIRI, Cold Case Investigative Research Institute, a partnership between Auburn University, Montgomery Faulkner University, and Bowdoin College on specific projects. T.A. Powell has several other novels to her credit and is currently working on a series that will continue the storyline of her historical preservation character, Caroline Horton. T.A.'s next novel, and we'll find out how accurate this is. The Coffee Pot Conspiracy surrounds the mysterious death of an alcohol, tobacco, and tax agent in southern Georgia in 1966. Featured author T.A. Powell came to our attention during the Moores Ford Bridge investigation. As author of the novel, The Danbury, and let me just go to the next thing. The Danbury Diary, based part on the actual events of the Moores Ford Bridge lynching. She has been a valuable resource to the students at the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute. Through both oral and written presentation of her research, TA's intuitive investigating and due diligence to detail brings case history to life for our students. She's a wonderful storyteller as well as an advocate for justice, and is listed among CCIRI's experts. And she also, you can hear Elsa, can't you?
Yes, let's do this. Faulkner University in Boulder College. BrownstoneLiteraryWorks.com is their website where you can find more information. And let's just bring her on in and start the conversation, because I have a tremendous amount of admiration for anyone involved in theater. Welcome, TA, to the program.
Happy holidays to you both. Thank you.
My wife is the executive director of a community theater here in Michigan, so we've been involved in theater for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in theater and playwriting.
Oh, well, let me see. For the theater portion of that, it happens as all good adventures do with your children. One of my oldest, who's now an equity performer and performs internationally, wanted to audition for a role at the ripe old age of, I think, 10 or 11, and ended up wanting to go on stage, but at the last minute when they called her up to audition, got stage fright. And was like, please with me. And I went, well, Dave, no, you don't understand. I have a horse farm. I have no time for, just go. And so she said, well, I can't go up there without you. And I went, oh, for God's sake, all right, fine, hurry up. We got to go. I got to go home. I got to feed horses, got to do the thing and whatever. So we got up on stage, and while I was up there, then all of a sudden, the gentleman who was directing that particular show has said, will you please audition for the role of... No, I think you misunderstood. I said, that's not the way we started. And so he said, could you just, so we can get a good read through. So I went ahead and I did it. Well, anyway, long story short, I was cast in the role of Mrs. Darling. my daughter did get a role that she wanted and everything. And so it just kind of progressed from being part of their experience on stage to seeing what plays were selected. And then it was kind of like, it was another small community theater that was doing this. And so one day one of my kids said, well, Mom, you could write something funnier than that. And I went, well, yes, but that would be in between shovels of horse poo. And so, but eventually I just went ahead and just on a whim, I did that. And then 9 plays later, I was picked up by a publisher and was given a contract carte blanche for any finished product that I had. And then that translated later on into not only taking care of stage and whatever and doing all the things that when you're involved with community theater. It's everything from cleaning a toilet to making plays, to whatever. And then ultimately I ended up in working with the theater that I work with now, which serves not only a county-wide but an actual regional. And so it was a very interesting, long little trail to get there, but have been at the helm of that particular program now for over 17 years.
You deal with equity performers now?
No, we do not. Ours is not an equity house, although I have worked with some former equity performers because they're not allowed to do.
Oh, I know, they got to get special permission to do it.
Yes, so that's a very infrequent thing. So, but that's what I do to pay the bills during the day, and then, or actually, it's very good therapy for the other flip side.
Excellent. Well, so you and I, like I say, we have something in common, and I just wanted to compliment you and say, because theater is such a special art, and it's been undergoing a lot of weird things the last couple of years because of COVID and everything else. But playwriting, now that is really something. Putting pen to paper and getting this done. You must. Now, how does this tie in with criminal activity and the sort of stuff that we're talking about today? How did that come forth from that?
Okay, the arc of this bridge, I'm going to make it really easy for you because you don't have eons of time for all of this nonsense.
Sure.
It went from writing plays because, not that there was a lack of material, but there was a lack of new material out there. And so once I got published with that, then I started to write another thing, and with intentions of using it within the play theatrical field, and then realized that what I was writing was much too large to put on a stage. And so my husband said, well, why don't you write a book? So it progressed from the playwriting to the historical fiction, because I'm fascinated by the factual portions of things. And generally, stories, if told well, if you want to fly under that litigious radar, you kind of have to marry the two between fiction and historical fiction. And I did that with the Danberg Diary. I did that with 2 separate murders that happened and then connected them via a narrative. And it was very successful and very gripping. But it was one day, and I was telling this to Penny the other day, I was at a book signing, and suddenly a woman said to me, she said, well, so which part was the real part and which part was, just the made up stuff? And I went, well, no, you're missing the whole point of the story. The story was to present you with these cases and these tragedies within these individual lives and everything. And this particular book, the Danberg Diary, was about a very historic, it was tagged as the last mass lynching in America, where African Americans were murdered in broad daylight at the Walton and Oconee County lines in the state of Georgia. And then it was tied in with another murder that had been given, the information had been given to me by a family member. And so in doing that, then suddenly it dawned on me, I thought, well, here, having done this, I thought this was wonderful until I realized that historical fiction, while a marvelous vehicle for getting information out there and for providing, if it still doesn't provide the clarity that you need in order to move these cases forward or to find some sort of resolution or peace for the individuals that had to go through that, then ultimately I wasn't serving the purpose that I was meant to serve, which was to bring some sort of sense of closure, some additional fact finding. And so it was at that point that I decided that it's one of those things where if God can lead you to it, then he will need to see you through it, sort of thing. And so I decided at that point that I would leave the historical aside for maybe more fanciful kind of forays into the literary world. And I decided to, at that point, I went back to school to study investigative forensics. And I decided if I was going to talk the talk, I better be able to walk the walk, kind of thing. And from that point forward, then, I devoted my time to being a victim's advocate and moving forward and only write now true crime investigative memoirs on all the cases that I work.
Wow. All right. Well, give us some examples of the types of cases that you have been involved in, and how this knowledge that you gained through learning about forensics helped you to do this.
It actually was extremely advantageous and fortuitous that I decided to do that. It was funny because the victim of the case that you were talking about in that biography, which was a little bit older, that was one of the original working titles for what eventually became The Thin Gray Line, was originally a working title under the Coffee Pot Conspiracy. And that was about an ATF agent. Back then they called him AT&T, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Treasury Agents, in Valdosta in 1966, whom the family had believed had been murdered, although his death was listed as suicide. And so when I started investigating that, it did take I have a much leaner process now, but the first go around, it was a 4 to 5 year process of working the case itself and then producing the manuscript afterwards. Since then, I've learned that it's better just to go ahead and produce as you're going, because very often within just that mindset, that kind of flow of conscious or whatever, as you're writing, you tend to channel information or receive other information. And I don't know if Penny shared this with you, I also am a psychic medium detective. So I also
more about that too.
So while you're working with the dead and you're working with information that comes through from the dead, it helps if you kind of understand the language. And I know that sounds crazy to anybody who does not do this, but if you are a medium of some sort, if you have even just great intuition, because not everybody has the same spherical gift set, the skill sets. Some of them are only clairvoyant. I am clairsentient, clairaudient, clairvoyant, and I also have a background, very interested in numerology, so the manner in which the information comes to me in various ways. But in the beginning, I realized that I needed to include this as part of my process, because it not only made the information, number one, more accessible to you, the reader, or to fellow investigators, but it made it easier for me to continue to keep track of the information that I was accumulating while working on each case. So that particular strain of narrative is called real-time progressive revelation. And what that means basically is you, the reader, will understand what I, as not only the author and the investigator, understand at the time I am writing it. So in the case of the first book, The Thin Gray Line, which was about that ATF agent in 1966, eventually I was able to prove, not only through ballistics and question documents, that he had been murdered by local, state, and federal agency members, as opposed to having committed suicide. And that was wonderful, because I was able to work not only with statewide agency representatives from GBI, FBI, and ATF, but also I ended up working with ATF in Washington, D.C., which was marvelous, because Washington, D.C., ATF as a whole, as an agency, which is now called ATF&E, they don't have a cold case department. And so, seeing as this was so distant and so many of the individuals had passed that were eventually found to have been involved, it was really just shy of a miracle that they were interested in even entertaining some of the information. But I was able to produce a final report which showed that there had been a second page removed during a process somewhere. I have a good idea, but I also don't want to spoil the book for people who may want to go out and get it.
Sure.
But that a document had been removed either prior to or at the state crime lab. And that second page, I discovered from an original set of documents, I discovered that during that, when a bullet is fired through any weapon, be it rifle, pistol, whatever, it has specific ballistics. In other words, it has a specific signature. And that signature will carry on the casing. It will imprint upon the casing what happens in the barrel, inside the barrel of either the rifle, the pistol, etc. So those are called lands and grooves. And they're kind of like fingerprints in that each weapon will have its own individual markings because of the way in which it was manufactured, etc. So they're very much like fingerprints. And those get carried embedded onto the bullet casings. And so what I discovered was one set had left-hand grooves, twists, and then the other was a right hand. So that showed you that ballistic-wise, you were not talking about two bullets that were fired into the victim from the same weapon. There was actually two separate guns that happened.
Oh.
And without wanting to get too terribly graphic, shot at close range, both of these. One of them, one went from here and then lodged in the temporal lobe, and then from this. And the odd thing about it was, having reviewed some of the crime scene photos, that the skull had been broken, but not the skin. And you would think, how is that even possible that a weapon fired that close would do that, but not break through?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, doing enough research and going back through the widow's diary and everything, she had recorded everything that she could possibly remember, which was an extremely helpful piece of evidence as well, was that the day just before this happened, or 2 days just before, this particular agent, every once in a while, even like for sheriff's departments and stuff, you have to go and qualify with your weapons. And he had gone to qualify with his weapons. And what they do is, when they do that for target practice, they use what's called wad cutters, which slows the bullet down so you can see exactly where the trajectory of your bullet and where it's gone through once it hits its target. And one of those weapons fired had to have had a wad cutter on it, because otherwise it would have permeated not only skull, but also the skin. And so that was a clue. But so research is imperative, knowledge, being able to apply the information that you have and see what's applicable to the situation. So forensically, it was not only the question documents of documents having been forged, but also the removal of certain documents, and then of course witness statements, etc. And then, as I stated before, there was information that came through from the victim himself. Now, yes, one could take umbrage and say, is that admissible in a court of law? Well, no, but that's not the necessary requirement that I have for that information. My requirement, or my needs, are that the information that is provided through the dead, or through even a live witness, is exactly the same. Is the information provided will lead me to information that is critical, physical, or circumstantial, and that will be used in a court of law. And so it's not the do-all, end-all. It's not like you can simply, you can't do that thing where you just walk into a court of law and you go, oh, by the way, the man in the corner wearing the purple carnation and the gray tennis shoes, he did it. No. that may, spirit may give information that leads you to someone who may fit that description. And then, of course, but you have to use all of the peripheral and spherical knowledge that you have surrounding the rest of the case and all the other evidence that's presented. And you have to be able to put that together in a final report. And so that linearly you can put together the pieces and connect all the dots for everybody else who doesn't have the same kind of, I guess you would say, information highway that some individuals, yes, yes, it's a little outside the norm for some people, but it's very much within the norm for a lot of these cases. And a lot of police departments and law enforcement agencies do use the help of outside individuals such as myself in order to help fill in these other little building blocks that they need in order to take that information and then go seek other information, what it can lead to, so that you can piecemeal everything together and then be able to present a very cohesive and factual based and evidence based, either patterned evidence or in the case of that particular case, I was able to prove that there were missing documents that proved that he was murdered by somebody else. And then I was able to build further on that, pointing to other individuals who were involved with his murder that night.
So, TA, I would like to, I'm muting myself because I have a new puppy that's howling, literally.
I have two that if you hear them sing in tandem in the background, we would put them together in a little group. And,
so I wanted to let people know how incredibly detailed you are. In Lords of the Harvest, I'm looking through and I'd like to read a little bit from your prologue. You have chapter 161. That's your final chapter with an epilogue. So this is not a willy-nilly kind of, woo-hoo thing. This is extremely intensive research. And Lords of the Harvest is, we had spoken a little bit about it, and I'm going to read from your prologue. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. Proverbs 4:7. While it's not my intention to begin this book with a riddle for levity's sake, it is my intention to ask you to use your intellect from page 1. You see, some murders are prompted by basic emotions that render a killer's motivation most obvious. Other murders are committed out of a need to serve a higher purpose, such as personal or ideological loyalty and or religious martyrdom. But the Columbus stalking strangler murders will never rise to the elegance of such, no matter how much the perpetrators of these atrocities might insist. These graphic slayings of 7 elderly white women were executed for a series of reasons that for over almost 4 decades have gone undecipherable, and in the end were simply a part of a much larger puzzle that until now has remained hidden. So let us continue with the riddle. What is another word for thesaurus? Thought-provoking, isn't it? For how do you describe something that in essence exists only to describe everything else but not itself? I think you would agree with me then that sometimes there simply isn't a better word or group of words to describe a thing other than the words that originally describes it the best. Thus you have the reason for why the title of this book could be nothing other than Lords of the Harvest. The word harvest is defined as the process of gathering mature crops from the fields to be used for provisions at a later time. In like token, reaping is the cutting of mature grains or produce for harvest, typically using a scythe, sickle, or reaper. For purposes of proficiency, we'll begin this story with my introduction to the murders in Columbus, Georgia in 1977, where the word harvest took on another meaning. And the tools that were used to harvest these matured victims will not only shock you, but lead you to other horrors once shrouded in mystery and considered as standalone or disconnected serial murders until my discovery of the key that unlocks them all. But to understand everything, you must first read everything. For it is only in reading the totality of this book that the true understanding of the key and its power can be found.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. How did you, can I ask, when did you first discover you had these abilities, these psychic abilities?
Like most intuitives or or empaths. You know, as a kid, you always think that there's something different, special, odd, whatever. So, you know, sometimes there would just be a knowing about something and not understanding why there was a knowing, but it literally, you hear people that say, I don't know how I know it, I just know this. And then it grew from that. And then in my 40s, after I had, actually right before I started writing again, I had a medical issue. And in my conversation, when I was talking with Penny the other day, I was telling her that something, I believe, like something happened under the knife, so to speak, where when I was done and I came out of recovery, I had this great sense that I needed to go back and I needed to start honing my skills and whatever. And so opportunities presented themselves. And so you were simply led. And I'm not going to say the path was easy. It wasn't. I mean, obviously, you know, playwriting is 360 degrees from this other. But it works out that, you know, Source is extremely kind, because he provides not only a way to satisfy something that is intellectually stimulating, challenging, you know, that hits all of your supreme interest and your geeks, so to speak, the things that you have a love for, a passion for. And it was odd because I remember sitting there one day and I thought, well, what the heck? You feel called to serve, and yet you look at yourself. And I remember, because I literally made a fleece with God about this, and I'm notorious for doing that. And I'm sure he gets extremely entertained by me. I'm like catnip. He just says, throw this at her and today, and let's see what the heck she does with it.
Yeah.
But I had remember at one point, you know, after the writing and not getting responses and not getting any kind of positive feedback other than, you know, that I decided to write. I decided to pull a T.S. Eliot and write strictly under my initials. Initially, that was because I was tired of the Dear Mrs. Powell, you know, thank you so much for your subscription, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, hell, they didn't even wrinkle the damn page. And so after a while, I thought, could it be that in the 21st century, we're still looking at, you know, jockey shorts versus brassieres? And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to send the exact same package out to somebody that's a little less geographically biased, as I say, for the theater, because apparently, you know, there's a lot of, and you'll understand this being in the theater, if you don't reside inside New York or Chicago, they somehow apparently think that only those are the meccas for talent, which of course is a fallacy, because, you know, talent is wherever God finds you.
Exactly.
And so I sent off the exact same things, and immediately was picked up, you know, like, we would like all of your finished work. So, but the interesting thing about what happens with this now, with the true crime, is it takes a love of science, a love of law, a love of Egyptology, a love of theosophy, a love of even the tarot, the great mysteries, secret societies, this, that, forensics, all of those things combined together, and you think, where can I place all of that and serve a higher purpose? And remarkably, when I was talking to Penny the other day, and we were talking about Lords of the Harvest, it moved on from these Columbus stocking stranglings into other serial killings that I found pattern behavior that presented itself through information and other evidence. And there were connections to the Zodiac kills. And you will find this of particular interest, David, especially having your background and your wife's. And that we were discussing the other day about the Paul Stein murder from the Zodiac. Mm-hmm. Well, the Zodiac, as in Zodiacs, because there was more than one individual that participated in that series of killings throughout the decades. His particular murder was committed right there in the theater district at Cherry Street in Washington.
Right.
Okay, so you look at that and you go, you have to understand, and when you start having to think, you have to crawl inside as much as you possibly can, which is difficult, because if your psyche is normal, it's hard to think sociopathically. However, there are things that are triggers, or there are things that are identifiers that you immediately will see as stepping stones and roadmaps. So I went theater. All right. So this is source asking me to use there has to be something in here that begs of me to use my background within the theater to help look at this from a different perspective. One that an average, let's say, law enforcement agent would not have, and God bless them, because nobody needs to live inside my head, and other than me, you know. And so I was looking at this, but I was looking at it from a perspective as a director, and I went, okay, so this happens in the theater district. Well, nobody goes to the theater district, whether it's Boston or New York or any place else. Nobody does that without some interest, right? Right. So it happens that the particular theater right there on the corner was in rehearsal for the Mikado. Now, okay. So as not to make this so convoluted that people can't track, but this is how you connect all of these little stepping stones. You have a person, a POI, person of interest. So you have a suspect, and you understand that in his background, he also has a love of theater, great involvement within the theater. He and several other
director, producer, someone in that field. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in that area, right?
Right. So when you look at it from that perspective, then you're going, okay, so this is interesting. So what other things can I tie to this? Well, that particular murder happened with a 9mm close range. The killer sent to the San Francisco Chronicle and to the San Francisco Police Department, you know, a square of the bloodied shirt that the cab driver was wearing. In essence, he was duplicating and mimicking the same Jack the Ripper move when he cut the leather apron of one of the prostitutes that he had murdered, because he was furious with Scotland Yard for not identifying his brilliance. And so you have this exact same thing. So you start to look at the patterns, and then you look at the pattern of deviated patterns. And because it's all in there. So then I started looking at other Zodiac kills. Well, then, as I was talking to Penny about, there you had the double murder at Lake Berryessa. And the two young people who were there, and they had given, there had been descriptions of the Zodiac, right? And there were drawings. So if you later on Google and you see this drawing or whatever, sketch of what the Zodiac, he was wearing some sort of, what they said, you know, a costume, but not necessarily costume. This was something that was clearly handmade. This was his whatever. And so as an investigator, I'm going, okay, so understanding that everything has great significance, because these people were as diabolical as they were extremely intelligent and very cerebral. So that you understand the approach, then you understand that everything that they say has meaning, hidden meaning, everything that they do has hidden meaning, everything is connected to something within their specific expertise or field or whatever. So then you look at the murder again, you say, okay, so Paul Stine was murdered right there in the theater district. It gives a physical description of the serial killer, which you already know matches the direct physical description and physicality of your POI. And then you take it one step further and you say, okay, so let's go back and let's look at the sketch. Well, looking at the sketch, now your average Joe or average law enforcement agent, if he hadn't, been immersed somewhere in the arts, specific to theater, it wouldn't have triggered for any of them. So I'm not faulting anybody. But as soon as I looked at that sketch again, and I looked at it through the eyes of a theatrical lens, I went, oh my gosh. Here this murder takes place right outside a theater that is in rehearsals for the Mikado. In the Mikado itself, there's a scene where it's a gravedigger scene. And they have a specific costume that these gravediggers that perform a musical number within the Mikado wears. That is the exact same outfit that matches the sketch of the Zodiac. Now, you will not see that anywhere else. That is in Lords of the Harvest, a true crime investigative memoir. And I have since spoken with several people within law enforcement, including an individual who used to be former CIA, and I told Penny about that particular thing. And that was not something that he was like, where did you get this information? Who told you that? I said, no. I said, you have to understand the information was already there. It's just that because your background wasn't broad enough or eclectic enough,
looking at it through the right lens.
You can look at it until the cows come home, and you're never going to see, and you're not going to make the connection. But also knowing that this particular individual had performed the Mikado in his hometown and had all of the memorabilia and the decorations within his own home, and was stationed at the Presidio at the time that all of this happened. Then you start to put these, like I said, these are the little stepping stones, and these are your benchmarks that you say, okay, now I understand what this sketch means. This sketch isn't just, something that has some personal whatever. Yes, it's personal, but it's personal because he had access to costuming from the Mikado, which was at the theater being rehearsed at the same time. And then you go back and you find out that 2 of the individuals who were involved in some of these serial killings out of 4 were also theatrically based and in rehearsals for that show at the exact same time that these murders took place. Then, of course, you can connect that to other things.
Wow.
But I digress.
I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat. That you could. This is like the plot of a great movie. I mean, and yet here it is, real, and this is incredible, Penny.
Yes. Also, the way that I found you was actually through Angela Ward from the Dixie Mafia book that you wrote. Is that the title of that? Is that The Deadline?
Yes, The Deadline, it's Confessions of a Dixie Mafia Assassin. And that is currently...
Can you tell her?
Can I? Okay, you glitched there for a second. What was that?
Can you tell us how you met Angela?
Angela I met through a series of introductions. Hold on just a second here. It was very interesting. The case itself came to me through Phyllis Anderson, who basically, her brother and her father were both murdered by the Dixie Mafia. They too committed suicide, as all unfortunate victims connected to the mafia or to, illegal organizations such as that tend to go. But especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, of course, they're still extremely active as of today, and I'm sure that all of you are very well aware of that, as I am well aware of that also. But Angela, yes, I was in the process of working that particular case for Phyllis when I received information about somebody who had been a potential eyewitness to a conversation that reflected back to the Sherry murders, Judge Sherry and his wife, Margaret. And so that, she was very instrumental in helping with a lot of information in that case, because she was a very young child, but she's, as you know, has, an incredible memory, and, was working terribly hard to save her mother. And of course, that did not materialize positively for either of them in the end. But she was extremely instrumental in helping with several things. I admire her tremendously. She has an intestinal fortitude for justice and loyalty, just beyond measure. She's incredible. But she was extremely helpful because, if I might connect one more piece just to show the connection between the spiritual nature of how these things evolve. As I was telling Penny the other day, there was a connection, an impression that came through from the very beginning once I had accepted the case, because I don't accept all cases. And I only do so with guidance. And I know this sounds a little bit hokey for some folks, but divine guidance. In other words, I don't accept a case unless I know that I will be hopefully protected throughout the process. Because the whole point of doing this is to receive not necessarily closure, because there's no closure with grief. It's just a transmutation of grief to something that becomes more palatable, that you cannot necessarily live with, but you try to understand. And I always caution any individual who comes to me with a case that they need to understand that sometimes getting their answers brings them less peace.
Yes.
And that's hard for somebody to hear, but knowing something doesn't make something less painful. It also doesn't necessarily get you into a court of law, which is extremely sad. But in these days and times, it's not necessarily, even if you have all the critical physical evidence that you could possibly amass, and trust me, that book is slammed with everything. But here's an interesting thing. The thing that connects to Angela strongly is that one of the individuals that came through, someone who had passed over, came through from the very beginning. And as I was telling Peggy, they were, very pretty young blonde, gorgeous, bleach blonde, beautiful red lipstick, standing outside a building which there were no earmarks per se, but you had the innate sense that this was a movie house. And she was wearing a bleached fur rabbit coat like they wore back then. And she was smiling. And the impression was that I needed to find her, that I should come and I should find her. And that was odd, because you're thinking, why would I need to find you? This sense, but there was this just overwhelming sense of being lost. And so I thought, okay. And so the name had been given, the information had been given a nickname of Calamity Jane. Well, Calamity Jane, obviously everybody goes, oh, well, bad things always happen around this person. Well, yes, and in fact they did, consistently. And, murder after murder after murder. And so, but I had no knowledge of who this person really was. I had a physical impression of who this person was. I had, this vague background of whatever. And so I started digging in and tried to connect with as many people as I possibly could, asking, who is Calamity Jane? Who is Calamity? And then finally I hit upon people who laughed and said, how do you know? And I said, just talk to me about Calamity Jane. Who is it that this person was? Well, there's, an entire series of events that had to take place in order to figure out who this person was. Because the impression came through that not only the original impression that I just gave you, but then there was another impression of people out there in the nighttime with mallets and hammers and destroying this person's gravestone, this grave marker. So then, of course, you go through the typical research, and you go through and you look for newspaper articles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I found articles that referenced gravestones being damaged, but they kept referring to names that were like back in the 1800s. And I'm going, no, that's not my girl. Nobody, my girl is like a 1968 kind of hanging out, doing the bleached fur rabbit coat that every high school, coquette used to wear, thinking that they were like, super cool, and, but it was fake and it was cheesy, but, it was the thing. And so I kept going, no, that can't be her. And yet I was still continually drawn to that until I found somebody who ended up being related to one of the victims, who then said, oh, yeah, that little bitch, yeah, I remember her. She got exactly what was coming to her. And I was like, okay. So let's, why did she get, and whatever. And then I said, do you understand, tombstones, people beating them, whatever. And she said, yeah. And so this was an older woman, and she had given me some other pointers and some other information. And one night I was talking, I had talked to several people, and I had gotten some information from somebody else who was doing some investigation and had connections with somebody else. And they were able to link me up with a potential name for this individual. But when you went to look for this individual, you couldn't find them. And then later on found out that Angela's mother was saying yes, because she had several different friends that either went missing or she had witnessed their murders or whatever, because anybody who was connected with the mafia, if you spoke or if they thought you were going to speak. And so there were several of them that were given, but only one of them matched something close to this person. And her name, it's in the book, so I don't want to talk about it on air right now, because not that I'm pimping for sales, but because, other people's lives are involved in this. And so if someone has need of knowing, they will be able to look up. But so what was discovered was this individual, yes, had indeed been murdered by the mafia, but had been buried in a cemetery, but in a section of a cemetery in Mississippi that was owned privately by a very connected family, a family that's still very connected. And so the gravestone was obliterated. Now, can you go into that property and exhume the body so that you can confirm? No, because legally you don't. If they don't allow you access, you can't exhume a body there. But with all the peripheral information and everything, we were able to identify who Calamity Jane was. And only when that body would be, if they would be forced, or because they certainly aren't going to do it voluntarily, we would be able to have the body exhumed and prove that she was strangled. But interesting enough, when we talk about Angela, when I was talking to her and I said who it was and whatever, and her mother kind of confirmed that yes, she knew exactly where and she knew what had happened as well. This is like 1 o'clock in the morning, my time zone, and Angela's like, well, I'm getting a flashlight and it's raining like hell, but I'm going. And I'm going where? Where are you going? What are you doing? She said, just stay on the phone with me. I was like, what are you doing? Where are you going? She got on her bike and she rode right to that cemetery and was in there in the dead of night, flashlight on, searching for the area so that she could get it confirmed for me. Wow. And I was like, dear God, woman. I said, you're going to get us both killed.
Yeah.
But she's a remarkable human being.
Tenacious.
Yes, I grieve for her loss. We did do as much as, I know that I did as much, and so did other people, did as much as we possibly could to try and secure her mother's release from a conservatorship that unfortunately was exceptionally abusive, not just for months, but for decades.
Do you think that her mother, she had talked about her mother being drugged when she was trying to disclose some things, thrown in a crazy house? Do you think that her mother MK Ultra'd?
Yes, there seemed to have been, when there were certain things that both of them unfortunately experienced that were very much identifiers, traditional identifiers. And of course, you and I discussed that the other day. There's certain things that happened to both of them. Both of them were trafficked. Both of them were owned, places that they were sent to. All of these things present patterns of, unfortunately, recognizable patterns to people who are in the know of where someone is trafficked, because not everybody is trafficked in the same fashion and of course MK Ultra, while everybody thinks it's the cute little series of Stranger Things or whatever, is very real. And when I was talking to Penny the other day, I was telling her that 2 of the 4 individuals that are POIs in the Lords of the High Harvest, the book she was referring to, were part of the original Artichoke program. I mean, you had one that was involved with the Army Chemical of Engineers. So anybody who's truly interested in the real origins needs to watch the Wormwood documentary about Dr. Frank Olson.
Yeah.
And then move forward. So one of my serial killers was involved with the Army Chemical Corps of Engineer. 2 of those individuals were based out of the Presidio, which, nobody likes to talk about it, but all you have to do is Google 1980s, and you have all the sex scandals that you can deal with that are connected also to Michael Aquino, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino out there at the Presidio in San Francisco, and 2 of the POIs that were involved in these serial killings, and which are chronicled within that book. And like she said, there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into that. The book is over 700 and some odd pages long. The bibliography alone is like 14 to 18 pages or something at 8-point font. I mean, so I document beyond what is necessary, even for attorneys, simply because there's always somebody who goes, oh yeah, well, that's a coincidence. Well, no, you know
Right.
what, like Rudy Giuliani says, coincidence after coincidence after coincidence is no longer a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't actually even use that word. It's omitted from my vocabulary. TA, we're running out of time. I'm going to ask you, would you like to come back? Because we would love to have you come back.
Oh, that is very sweet of you. If you found this to be of service or entertaining at some level, I would be honored.
This was an absolute wonderful hour.
Yes.
We'd love to have you back.
Well, that would be fine with me. Like I said, I told Penny the other day, I do not charge for my services. This is all for the victims, for the families of the victims, and for all of them. So each of the cases that in the books, if they go on Amazon, because you can't just buy them through a store, most
I'm going to ask, where can we get your books?
you can, they are on Amazon. They're under T.A. Powell, True Crime. I also have a podcast, www.dialoguewiththedead.com, where I read excerpts from some of the books. The books themselves, I'm not going to lie, it is heady reading. You have to pay attention because this isn't fiction. These are people's lives. These are people's horrors. This is real evidence, physical, critical, things that lawyers can and could walk into a court of law with, and yet they aren't. And like I always like to say, it's in the questions that don't get asked that you find the greatest answers. Why aren't lawyers walking into courts of law for these cases? And that's because many of the people involved, or many of the agencies involved, are still very active within those cases or those legacies, let's say. And
How
so
can
I would be honored.
How can people get in touch with you? Can they?
The Dialogue with the Dead has a website of its own. So they can reach me through the contacts that's provided there on that website. Like I said before, but I will say it again, I also don't accept every case that's brought to me. People do need to understand that. There have been some cases that have been brought to me that have broken my heart, and yet the individuals, the victims from the other side, it's not that they are not willing, it's that their intent is that knowledge of what happened to them may bring greater harm to those questioning. And so sometimes, unfortunately, that's the only message I can share with someone, is that, your loved one says, no, this is where whatever this is needs to end, because it will bring you nothing and the higher purpose will not be served with your knowledge, and it may place you in danger. So lots of times, unfortunately, I have to walk away from cases, and I only go where I am guided to go. So, but anybody who has any information, I learned a tremendous amount talking with you the other day that confirmed some other things. So it was very wonderful. So thank you for some of those supportive mechanisms.
Thank you. I think you're an extremely important person, and like we both discussed, there are no coincidences. So we are, now intertwined in each other's lives.
God help us both.
Right? For as long as we're on this planet, we're going to be in touch with one another. And I do want to thank you for your extraordinary work and, the quality person that I am honored to meet and to get to know further on down the road. Thank you.
Thank you both, David and Penny. It's been an
I'm really
absolute
looking
joy.
forward to having you back on the show. Please come back. We absolutely loved it.
I would be blessed to do so. And thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your holidays.
Thank you. You too. God bless you. Bye-bye now. T.A. Powell here on the Dark Outpost. That was riveting. She's absolutely
amazing, David.
Oh my God, she's absolutely amazing. And I highly recommend you go to Amazon.com and look up under T.A. Powell, and you'll be able to access her books. And obviously, she's still involved in theater, and this is good stuff. I want to wrap things up today with a quick story. This is interesting. A prison guard in Alabama and his wife were arrested last Tuesday for smuggling contraband into a state prison. What did they smuggle? Hamburgers. Limestone Correctional Facility officer John Chambers and his wife Sophia Chambers were charged with bringing in hamburgers in return for cash over a 5-month period between June and October. Folks, tell me he didn't smuggle them in the usual way.
Ooh, I don't want to know.
I heard, well, you know what I'm talking about. But no, actually, he's probably snuck them in through a paddy wagon. Think about that one for a while.
Oh, that's hysterical.
That is going to do it for this edition of the Dark Outpost. Penny and I will be back tomorrow. We'll see you then. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We're out of time, so we're out of here. Zublik out.
Shepherd out.